In the velvet shadows of Queen Lysara's chamber, Kael's breath mingled with hers, a forbidden dance of whispers and warmth. Their bodies pressed close, her silken gown slipping to the floor as his calloused hands traced the curve of her spine. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and desire, each touch a rebellion against the crown that bound her. Lysara's sighs were soft, urgent, her fingers threading through Kael's dark hair as she pulled him deeper into the fire of their secret. The world beyond the heavy curtains ceased to exist. No king, no court. Only the pulse of their shared defiance. His lips found the hollow of her throat, and she arched against him, a queen surrendering to a slave's tenderness. The bed creaked beneath their weight, a quiet traitor to their stolen moment, as moonlight carved their silhouettes against the stone wall. Every stolen kiss was a spark, every caress a vow they could never speak aloud. The door remained locked, but the danger was alive, a specter hovering in the stillness. They moved with the desperation of those who knew time was a thief. Her emerald eyes burned with something beyond lust, something that terrified her as much as it consumed her. Kael too felt the weight of it, his heart a drumbeat of devotion and dread. They were not merely lovers, they were conspirators in a truth too fragile to survive the dawn. And yet, in that fleeting hour, they were infinite, their bodies weaving a story no one could unwrite. The court of Eldoria buzzed with whispers, but none dared speak the truth aloud. The affair, if discovered, would mean death, or worse. Yet Lysara and Kael could not stop, drawn to each other like moths to a flame they knew would burn them both. Their stolen moments were a rebellion against the chains of duty and station, a defiance of a world that demanded they be less than they were. In the queen's chambers, with moonlight spilling through the arched windows, they found a sanctuary where titles dissolved, and they were simply two souls who had found each other in the dark. Lysara's fingers traced the scars on Kael's back, remnants of a childhood marked by whips and servitude. Each mark was a story of survival, and she wanted to know them all, to carry his pain as he carried her loneliness. Kael's hands, calloused from years of labor, were gentle against her skin, as if she were a treasure he feared breaking. They spoke in whispers, not of politics or power, but of dreams, a life where they could walk hand in hand under the sun, not skulk in shadows. Each word was a brick in the fragile castle they built, a structure they knew could crumble at any moment. Outside, the palace slept, but the night was alive with its own secrets. Guards patrolled the corridors, their boots echoing like distant thunder. Servants whispered in corners, their loyalty split between coin and fear. The court of Eldoria was a labyrinth of ambition, where every smile hid a dagger, and every kindness came with a price. Lysara and Kael knew this, had always known it, yet they pressed on, their love a reckless wager against fate. Long before the night of tangled limbs and whispered promises, the kingdom of Eldoria was a tapestry of opulence and unrest. King Arvin, a man of iron will and weary heart, had ruled for 2 decades, his throne built on alliances rather than love. His marriage to Lysara, a princess from the rival house of Visirun, was a pact to end a century of war. She was a vision, hair like spun gold, eyes that held storms, but her spirit was caged by duty. Arvin admired her, even respected her, but his love was reserved for the crown. Their bed grew cold, their conversations brittle, and Lysara at 28 felt her youth slipping into the shadows of protocol. The court was a glittering prison, its halls lined with tapestries depicting victories no one remembered. High lords and ladies moved like chess pieces, their alliances shifting with every season. Lysara played her part flawlessly, smiling at banquets, nodding at council meetings, but inside she was unraveling. She missed the wind-swept cliffs of Veirun, where she had run barefoot as a girl, her laughter mingling with the sea's roar. In Eldoria she was a queen, but she was also a stranger, her heart a locked room no one sought to enter. Kael entered the palace as a boy, one of many slaves traded from the conquered southern tribes. His skin was darker than the pale nobles of Eldoria, his eyes a deep amber that seemed to hold the sun. He was silent, watchful, his hands quick to learn any task assigned. The other slaves envied his favor when Arvin chose him as a personal attendant. But Kael felt no pride, only the weight of survival. He polished armor until it gleamed, poured wine without spilling a drop, and listened, always listened, to the court's secrets. By 25, Kael was no longer a boy, but a man whose humility masked a soul that burned for more. He saw Lysara daily, her grace a contrast to the court's cruelty, her loneliness a mirror to his own. She moved through the palace like a ghost, her presence commanding yet distant. Cal noticed the way her fingers lingered on the petals of flowers in the garden, the way her eyes softened when she thought no one was watching. She was a queen, untouchable, yet he saw her. The woman beneath the crown, the one who yearned for something the court could not give. Lysara noticed him too, not as a servant but as a presence who saw her when others saw only the queen. His gaze was not the leering stare of courtiers or the cold appraisal of lords. It was warm, curious, as if he saw the girl she had been before duty claimed her. She found herself seeking him out, lingering in rooms where he worked, her heart quickening when their eyes met. It was dangerous, foolish, yet she could not stop. Their first true encounter was accidental, a late-night collision in the palace library. Lysara, sleepless and seeking solace in poetry, wandered the dimly lit stacks, her fingers trailing over leather-bound tomes. She found Kael seated by a window, a single candle illuminating the book in his lap. His fingers traced lines of forbidden verse, poetry banned for its talk of freedom and rebellion. He should have bowed and fled, but instead he looked up, his eyes meeting hers without fear. "The stars weep for those who cannot run," he said, quoting the page before him. Lysara froze, the words piercing her. She knew the poem, had read it in secret as a girl. "And yet they shine," she replied, finishing the line. His lips curved, not in mockery but in recognition. She sat across from him, the candle flickering between them, and for the first time in years, she laughed, soft, unguarded, a sound that felt like breaking chains. They spoke until the candle burned low, not of crowns or servitude, but of the world beyond Eldoria's walls. Kael told her of the southern deserts, where the sand sang under the wind. Lysara spoke of Varun's cliffs, where gulls danced with storm. It was a conversation that should never have happened, yet it changed everything. From there, stolen glances became stolen moments. A brush of hands in a corridor, a shared smile during a feast. Each meeting was a step toward the inevitable, a pull neither could resist. Lysara found herself inventing reasons to summon Kael, fetching a book, carrying a tray, each task a pretext to hear his voice. Kael too lingered longer than necessary, his duties stretching to catch her gaze. They were careful, always careful, but the court was a place of eyes, and every moment carried risk. The affair began in spring, under the guise of Lysara requesting Kael's assistance with her garden. The roses she tended became their alibi, the greenhouse their sanctuary. It was a glass-walled haven, its air thick with the scent of earth and blooms. There amid thorns and petals, they spoke of dreams they could never chase. Hers of freedom, his of a world where he was more than a shadow. Words turned to touches, touches to kisses, and soon the greenhouse was not enough. Her chambers became their haven, each encounter a defiance of the chains that bound them both. The first time they lay together, it was not lust but surrender, a giving in to a truth they had both fought. Lysara's skin burned under Kael's hands, her breath catching as he whispered her name. Not Your Majesty but Lysara. Kael felt the world shift, his heart no longer his own. They were reckless, yet they were whole, their love a fragile bridge over an abyss. Lysara's heart was a battlefield. She loved Kael's gentleness, his way of seeing her soul rather than her title, but guilt gnawed at her. Arvin was not cruel, only distant, and her betrayal felt like a blade she wielded against an unsuspecting man. She lay awake after Kael left, her body warm with his touch, her mind cold with shame. What was she doing? Risking everything for a man who could never be hers. Not truly, yet when Kael returned, his eyes searching hers, she fell again, unable to resist the tide. Kael too wrestled with his conscience. Arvin had spared his life when others would have struck him down, raising him from slave to trusted servant. Yet here he was, stealing the king's wife. He told himself it was wrong, that he should stop, but Lysara's touch was a fire he could not escape. He loved her. Not the queen but the woman who laughed at his stories, who traced his scars and called them beautiful. He knew the cost, knew it could mean his life, but he could not turn back. The court, though blind to the truth, sensed the shift. Servants whispered of Lesara's brighter smiles, of Kael's lingering glances. Maids noticed the queen's bed, sometimes unmade when it should have been pristine. Guards saw Kael leaving the palace at odd hours, his expression too serene for a man of his station. The High Lords, ever hungry for scandal, watched Lesara with narrowed eyes, their wives trading gossip over wine. "She's too radiant," they said. "A queen should not glow so." Lord Varys, a wiry man with a fox's smile, was the first to suspect he had long coveted Arven's throne, his loyalty a mask for ambition. He noticed Kael's absences, the way Lysara's gaze softened in the servant's presence. Varys said nothing, but his spies, servants bribed with coin, guards promised favor, began to watch. They reported back in whispers, a locked door, a muffled laugh, a rose petal caught in Kael's cloak. Varys hoarded the secrets, waiting for the moment to strike. Lady Alira, Lysara's closest confidant, saw more than she admitted. She loved the queen, had served her since Vafirun, but loyalty warred with fear. She caught Lysara humming one morning, a tune no court bard had played, and later saw Kael carve a wooden bird for the queen's garden. A gift too intimate for a servant. Alira held her tongue, but her silence was a prayer that the affair would end before it destroyed them all. Arfen, distracted by border disputes with the eastern clans, noticed nothing until he did. It was a letter, slipped under his door by an anonymous hand, that shattered the illusion. "Your queen loves another," it read, and though it named no one, Arfen's mind turned to Kael. He had seen the way Lysara looked at him, the way Kael stood a little straighter in her presence. He crumpled the letter, his laughter not one of joy but of resignation. He had failed her, he knew, failed to love her, as she deserved. But this was a wound he had not expected. Confrontation came swiftly. Arven summoned Lysara and Kael to the throne room at midnight, the court barred from entry. The guards stood like statues, their faces blank, as the king faced his wife and his servant. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, the throne a cold silhouette against the moonlit windows. Lysara's heart pounded, her hands trembling as she stood beside Kael. She expected rage, Kael expected death, but Arven's voice was steady, almost gentle. He spoke of their marriage, its hollowness a wound he had ignored. "I gave you a crown," he said to Lysara, "but not a heart. I see that now." He turned to Kael, his eyes searching. "And you, what did you give her?" Kael met his gaze, his voice low but unshaken. "I gave her what I had, my lord, my truth." Arven asked Lysara if she loved Kael, and her answer, a tearful yes, was a truth that cut them all. She spoke of loneliness, of a life spent playing a role, finding in Kael a mirror to her soul. Kael stood silent, ready to pay for his sin, but Arven's next words stunned them both. "You did what I could not," he said, his gaze on Kael. "You made her feel loved." The king's decision was madness to the court, a scandal that would echo for generations. He freed Kael not with a whip but with a title, Lord of the Southern Reach, a barren but symbolic land. "Let no man be punished for healing what I left broken," Arven declared, and the throne room fell silent. Lysara's tears fell freely, not for shame but for a husband who chose grace over vengeance. Kael, now a lord, felt the weight of his new name, a gift he had never sought. The consequences rippled outward. The court, expecting blood, was forced to swallow their outrage. High lords muttered of weakness, of a king too soft to rule, but none dared challenge Oran's will. Lord Varys, robbed of his scandal, retreated to his plots, his spies now watching the king himself. Lady Alira wept in private, her loyalty to Lysara unshaken but her fear undimmed. The servants who had whispered of love now spoke of miracles, of a king who defied tradition for truth. Lysara and Arven remained bound by marriage, but their bond shifted, not to passion but to a quiet understanding. Arven began to seek her counsel, not as a queen but as a partner. He asked about Virun, about her childhood, and listened as she spoke of waves and wind. Lysara in turn saw Arven anew, not as a distant king but as a man carrying a kingdom's weight. Their conversations grew longer, their silences softer, and though love did not return, respect took its place. Kael's title came with exile, subtle banishment to the Reach, where he would serve as steward of a land that needed rebuilding. He left with Lasara's locket, a token she pressed into his hand, and the memory of her touch. The southern reach was a land of dust and stone, its people hardened by years of neglect. They greeted Kale with suspicion. A former slave turned lord was no savior in their eyes. But Kale did not demand loyalty. He earned it. He worked beside them, his hands blistered from digging wells, his voice steady as he spoke of hope. Slowly, they began to listen. Lasara's days grew heavier. She was still queen, still radiant, but the court's whispers followed her like ghosts. Some admired her honesty, others scorned her betrayal, but all watched her now, waiting for another misstep. She tended her roses alone, each bloom a reminder of what she had gained and lost. Letters from Kale arrived in secret, carried by trusted maids, and though they never spoke of love, their words were a lifeline. She read them by candlelight, her fingers tracing his script, and wondered if she had traded one cage for another. Her role as queen demanded more now. Arvin's choice had weakened his standing, and Lasara worked to shore up alliances. She met with lords, charmed their wives, and spoke at councils with a fire she had not shown before. The court noticed, some grudgingly impressed, others wary of her influence. Lady Alara remained her shadow, offering silent support, but Lasara felt the distance growing. Lara feared for her, and Lasara could not blame her. Every day was a gamble, every smile a mask. At night, Lasara dreamed of Kale. She saw him in the reach, his hands shaping stone into homes, his eyes bright with purpose. She woke with his name on her lips, her heart aching for a life they could never have. She wrote to him, her letters careful but honest, speaking of the court, of her roses, of the stars she watched alone. She never asked him to return, knowing he could not, but each letter was a thread tying them across the miles. Kale, in the reach, found purpose in hardship. The land was harsh, its summers scorching, its winters bitter, but it was his. He built homes with the men, taught children to read by firelight, and listened to the elders' tales of a time before conquest. His humility won them slowly, his actions louder than any title. A well he dug brought water to a village, a barn he raised sheltered their harvest. They began to call him Lord Kale, not with scorn but with pride. He thought of Lasara, always. Her locket hung around his neck, a weight he cherished. At night, alone in his tent, he read her letters, each word a spark in the dark. She wrote of roses, of council meetings, of a king who was learning to listen. Kale smiled at that, grateful for Arvin's grace, but his heart yearned for her touch. He wrote back, telling her of the reach, of a girl who sang like a bird, of a sky so clear it felt like freedom. He never spoke of love, but it was there, woven into every line. The reach began to change. Trade routes opened, bringing cloth and grain. A school rose from the dust, its walls painted with children's laughter. Kale's name spread beyond the reach, carried by merchants who spoke of a lord who worked like a peasant and dreamed like a poet. Arvin heard the tales and nodded, a rare smile on his face. He had given Kale a barren land, but Kale was making it bloom. Arvin, too, was changed. The king who laughed at betrayal became a man who listened. He sought Lasara's counsel, not as a queen but as a partner, and though their love remained a memory, their respect grew. He faced the court's unrest with a steadier hand, his choice a quiet rebellion against tradition. Yet he dreamed of Kale's courage, of a heart unbound by fear, and wondered if he had lost more than he gained. The eastern clans grew bolder, their raids testing Eldoria's borders. Arvin led his armies himself, his presence a reminder of the king he had been, fierce, unyielding. Lasara joined him at war councils, her voice cutting through the lords' bickering. She spoke of peace, of alliances forged, not with swords but with trust. Arvin listened, and for the first time, he saw her not as a queen but as a leader. The clans retreated, not defeated but persuaded, and Eldoria breathed easier. At night, Arvin walked the palace alone, his steps echoing in the halls. He thought of Lasara, of Kalo, of a choice that had cost him the court's fear but gained him their respect. He had no regrets, but he felt the weight of what might have been. In his dreams, he saw Lasara laughing, not with Kala but with him, in a life where duty had not stolen their youth. Years passed, and Eldoria endured. The scandal faded, replaced by new intrigues, but its mark remained. Lasara grew older, her beauty tempered by wisdom, her roses a symbol of resilience. She became a queen not just of title but of heart, her counsel shaping laws that eased the burdens of the poor. The court still whispered, but now they spoke of her strength, of a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged unbroken. Chael's reach flourished, a testament to a man who loved beyond his station. The land was no longer barren, fields stretched green under the sun, and villages buzzed with life. Chael remained their lord, his hair streaked with gray, his hands still calloused. He never married, though women smiled at him, their eyes warm with possibility. His heart belonged to Lasara, a truth he carried quietly, like her locket against his skin. Arvan ruled until his hair turned silver, his laughter a rare but genuine sound. He grew softer in his later years, his throne less a burden than a duty he shared. Lasara stood beside him, not as a lover but as a friend, their bond a quiet triumph over pain. When he fell ill, she sat by his bedside, reading poetry as he had once done for her. He died with a smile, his hand in hers, and Eldoria mourned a king who had dared to be human. Lysara lived on, her reign a golden age. She never saw Chael again, but his letters never stopped. They wrote of small things, roses, stars, a child's laughter, and in those words, they kept their love alive. When Lysara grew frail, she sent Chael a final letter, a single page pressed with a rose petal. "You were my truth," she wrote, and he read it with tears in his eyes. Chael died a year later, his body laid in the reach he had rebuilt. The people buried him with honors, her locket still around his neck. They planted roses over his grave, red as the love he had carried. Lasara followed soon after, her death quiet like a sigh. The court wept, but the roses in her garden bloomed brighter that spring, as if she had never left. The narrative circles back to that first night, to Lasara and Chael in the heat of their defiance. It was not lust that drove them, but a hunger for something real, a touch that meant more than duty, a glance that saw more than a crown. Their love was a spark that burned too brightly, and though it cost them dearly, it lit a path none could have foreseen. In Eldoria, where betrayal was meant to end in blood, it ended instead in grace, a tale of passion and forgiveness that outlasted the stars. Epilogue. The whisper of eternity. Centuries later, Eldoria's halls still stand, their stones worn but proud. The roses in the palace garden bloom each spring, their petals a silent hymn to a queen who loved too fiercely. In the southern reach, a statue of Chael rises from a village square, his face carved with a gentle smile. Children play at its base, their laughter mingling with the wind, and the elders tell his story, a slave who became a lord, a man who loved a queen and changed a kingdom. Ervan's name lives in history, a king who ruled with iron and ended with mercy. His choice is studied by scholars, debated by poets, a moment when love triumphed over vengeance. The three of them, Lasara, Chael, Ervan, are woven into Eldoria's soul, their story a thread that binds the past to the present. In the quiet of night, when the stars burn bright, some say you can hear them still. A queen's laughter, a lord's whisper, a king's sigh. They are gone, yet they linger, their love a flame that time cannot extinguish. And in Eldoria, where roses grow wild, their truth endures. A spark that lit the world,